Thank you for joining us for another episode on Thrive and Advance podcast, where we help you make business growth predictable, profitable, and enjoyable. I'm your host, Dr. Shoureh Aftahi, and I am so excited to introduce our guest today, my good friend, Meredith Bell. Meredith is the co-founder and president of a global software company, Performance Support Systems. And she's been an entrepreneur since 1982, making success over and over a cornerstone of her journey. Hello, Meredith.
Hi, Shoureh. I'm really thrilled myself to be with you today. I know we always have great conversations, so I know this will be another one.
Absolutely. So I would like to open this up by asking you to tell us more about you and your journey, and then we go through specific points to help our audience to really benefit from what you're sharing today.
Well, today I am president and co-founder of a software company. But my journey to get here was an interesting one because I always wanted to be a teacher. And so back in college, that's what I focused on. And that was my first career, was teaching. But I quickly realized that I got bored having the same lessons every year. And so I quickly outgrew that, got my master's, and went into administration thinking that I could have a greater impact working with teachers and helping them be more effective. The problem was I ran into politics and bureaucracy, and I did not do well with either one. So in 1982, as you mentioned, I left without any kind of parachute and no business background. I just knew I was not happy where I was. I had skills that I couldn't use there. And so I jumped into starting my own business. I always loved the people side. I was always fascinated with how do people get along? How do they communicate? And so I decided to hang out my shingle and learn about sales, marketing, and business from scratch, and struggled at the beginning, as you can imagine, with not knowing exactly what I was doing. But I had this strong belief and strong confidence that I could make a difference with companies who, don't always tend to the people side of their business. So especially on the leadership side, there's an assumption often made, and I know you've seen it with your background, where someone is a really strong individual contributor, individual high performer, and so they get promoted. But they don't know what skill set is associated with being a leader now. And so they struggle. And especially in the area of communication, they aren't sure what they need to do to motivate people and really be effective. And so that was where I came in. I was helping companies, small, large, with this whole communications piece. How do you get along? How do you play well together? And I did that as a solo consultant for a number of years. And then I met one of my current business partners, Denny Coates, in 1990. We started collaborating on some projects and decided we were compatible, and brought in a third partner, Paula, who managed all the business side of things, the accounting, operations. And so the three of us have now worked together for 28 years.
Wow.
And so that in itself is pretty remarkable to look at, because anyone I speak to, they kind of shake their head because it's so rare anymore for business partnerships to have that kind of longevity.
Right.
But one of the things we learned over the years was how to come to appreciate each other's strengths. Because I think one of the challenges we run into in the workplace is we notice the differences among people, and we get annoyed when they're not thinking the same way we do, or adopting our perspective. And so we have friction, we've got challenges with people, instead of embracing what are the strengths each person brings to the table.
Right.
So as we learned how to do that with each other, it made us stronger as consultants when we went and worked with clients to help them. But what happened in the early 90s is we wanted to incorporate a 360 feedback tool with our work with clients, and one didn't exist that was customizable, economical, because most of those were, centrally scored, the scan forms, very expensive. And so we decided we wanted to create one of our own. So we hired a software developer and decided to pivot to being a software company in 1994. It reminded me of 82 when I went out on my own. I didn't know what I was doing. We didn't know how to be a software company, but we learned, we fell on our faces a number of times, but we were committed to bringing this tool to other organizations, because after using it with our own clients and seeing the power that it could have, we were committed to taking it out to the world. And so we still have the same passion and drive to make a difference with leaders. It's just that now we do it through our software tools rather than personally delivering the services.
Right. You touched on a couple of different things that I really want to unpack. So dig into it a little bit for our audience. One, you mentioned that you wanted to now bring a product to the market that didn't exist, which was software. You were not a software company. So you suddenly had to pivot and become a software company, and you learned. How did you do that successfully? Because many people, many business owners seem to not find their way and keep the growth going while they're learning to pivot. How did you do that?
Well, for one thing, we had a small team at that point. We had a few employees, and so it wasn't just, the three of us figuring it out. But we also had done some networking, and we had decided we were not going to bring on a sales team internally. And so we thought, all right, so who are the best people to help us take this to market? And the obvious answer to us was, it was other consultants who are already working with corporate clients who could see our tool as a great complement to the services that they were providing. And in fact, turned out to be a wonderful upfront assessment tool, because we made it customizable. It was used for organization surveys, not just individual 360 feedback surveys. So it allowed them to go in and gather information up front that helped them diagnose what are the issues this organization is dealing with that we could help them with.
Right.
So it was forming relationships with, and not just with individual consultants, but also with consultants who were strong salespeople and had their own strong network and were able to help spread the word more quickly. And so that was really a key. For me, Sheree, over the years, it has always come down to relationships. Because some of these resellers that we established relationships with in 94 and 95 are still with us. So we believe in long-term, relationships. We want our basic philosophy, and I think that's an important thing for any business owner or executive to think about. What are our core values that we bring to building relationships with other people? And a core one, actually, I'll tell you a few that we had. One was always being fair. They knew we would do the right thing by them, so they could trust us. And I think that's core, whether you're talking a business relationship or a personal relationship, trust is at the base of everything. And so how do you develop that? Well, one is you do the right thing by them, but also we had fun with them. We really wanted to make them feel like we were friends with them, not just a business relationship. So when they called, we would talk about family. We got to know them on an individual basis. And I think sometimes we think we've got to keep this, business distance, but people are people. And the more they feel like they can be comfortable with you, it strengthens the trust and it strengthens their commitment to work with you. And so I think those are some really core elements. Here's a key point: taking the long-term view. Not looking at it being transactional, how much money can we make with this particular sale, but it's looking at how can we structure the relationship and the arrangement so that it's a win for everybody. I think that's a key element that has to be a really primary component of how you work with someone.
Right. So if I'm going to summarize what you just said so eloquently, number one, you definitely strategized. So you strategized how you're going to go to market with this new product that was outside of your, say, comfort zone. That's not who you were before. And from the strategy, you developed the values, how you were going to engage with your power partners, with your resellers, and then you created a community. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's really true. Some of these folks did know each other, so we were getting cross referrals also. The other thing that I think is so important, when you do form these strong relationships and people are experiencing success, then they naturally tell other people about you, and then you're not investing money in marketing, to cold prospects. You are cultivating relationships with people, and then they are eager to tell others about what you do and about the benefits, obviously, of the product or service that you're offering.
So the people side of the business is one of the most significant factors in a business, in a company growing successfully or not. Some of our audience may not be familiar with 360. So if you explain a little bit about what this tool could do for an organization.
Sure.
And why it should be a focus.
Okay. Well, ideally, companies have a culture where people are comfortable giving each other feedback about their performance. But you and I both know that doesn't happen all the time.
No, right.
Because we don't learn these skills in school.
Right.
We're not really taught, unless we're raised in a family where this kind of healthy way of giving each other input about their performance or behavior is done, then we really don't know how to do it. Plus, it's very time efficient to have to go around individually and ask, how am I doing? To everybody that works with you. So 360 feedback is an automated process using a software program to first build. It's like a survey, but instead of a survey to ask how's the company doing, it's a survey to ask how an individual is doing. And it got the term 360 associated with it because originally the idea was you get it from all directions. It was strictly for managers, people in leadership roles. So it was their boss, their peers, and then their direct reports. And now, people use it for a variety of applications, including for individual contributors who don't have a 360 per se, but it's the idea of getting input from multiple sources, not just waiting for that once a year annual review.
Right.
And the purpose of it is developmental. It's to help people understand, what do others perceive your strengths to be? So how can you really do more of what they like that you're doing, as well as what are the opportunities for development? What is it they would like to see you change, modify, so that you are more effective in performing your job? Because just taking a very simple area, which is actually not an easy skill, but it's simple listening. So, so the questions about listening might be something like, allows people to finish their sentences, right?
Right.
Or lets others speak without interrupting. Because if you are in the habit of finishing other people's sentences or cutting them off, that can create a real problem, and people will be less likely to come to you and try to tell you something that you may need to know. Because if they feel like, oh, she's just gonna, finish it for me, or That kind of thing creates issues. Getting this input from others is an effective way to efficiently gather input from people who have firsthand knowledge of your work. And the program then summarizes all the input, so it's confidential, it's anonymous, nobody knows who said what or who gave a specific rating. It can be numerical only, up the responses, or it can also include comments so that people understand, why did I get the rating I did, to explain that more. So they get a report that allows them to see at a fairly easy, quick way, where are my strengths? Where do I need to focus? And really zeroing in on the one or two things that if they improve them will make the biggest difference. So that's why I said it's developmental. It's to help them improve. It ideally should not be used to determine what's your pay raise next year. The overall annual performance review, it should be separate from that. So it's developmental in nature. And people, again, ideally, sit down with their manager to go over the results and jointly agree, this is what I'm going to focus on, and have periodic conversations to check, how am I doing on these things that I said I was going to commit to doing.
Now, of course, the developmental piece is huge, but there is an underlying factor that makes this even more important for companies to consider one way or another. And that is, employees that are engaged are employees that are more productive. And employees that see that the company is focused and takes very specific steps and makes investments in their development, in them being more successful, in them increasing their capacity, are typically more engaged with the company. It's a sense of reciprocity.
Especially big with the millennials.
Right.
They really value the opportunities for development.
They do. It is a huge importance in today's market, particularly right now with unemployment being at a lower rate. The competition is pretty stiff for organizations to get quality employees and retaining them. Now, when we talk about development, because your organization also is focused not just providing the tool for 360, but one step further, creating or offering an environment, developmental environment that is very reasonable from an investment perspective. It's a wealth of knowledge and self-based, especially for organizations that don't have the budget to invest in having extensive training platform or training department per se, which is a huge cost. It's definitely something that is cost prohibitive for most companies, and that's why they shy away from focusing on development as much as they may desire to. So talk to that piece. And also, I know that I agree with your view of training, what makes training effective, and how you put that to work, and help our audience to kind of key into that on that.
That's a great question. And what you're referring to is our other program called Strong for Performance, which came about for two reasons. One, when Denny and I used to do training ourselves for leaders, the events themselves always got good reviews, good rating, people were excited and they were committed to go back and do things. But then when we would talk later, not a lot had changed. And it turns out this is common, that most training or development programs are treated as events, not ongoing development. And therefore, because of what we know about the brain and what it takes to really rewire it to learn and to master a new skill, a one-time event, even a 1 week or 2 week course, isn't going to cause someone's behavior to get transformed when they get back on the job. Because what happens over the years, we've got patterns that are hardwired in the brain, literally hardwired, that are our way of doing things. Just like how you cross your arms, you know, or cross your hands, you have ways that are comfortable. And so even though you may get introduced to a new skill and agree with it and say, yeah, that's the right way to do it, when we're hit in the face with the things that happen when we get back on the job, those old habits kick in.
Yes.
Our way of doing it. And the new thing we learned kind of flies out the window because it's not hardwired yet.
That's
and
true.
so one of the realities, and we saw this with 360 feedback also, if someone just gets a report and says, oh yeah, I see those are my top 3 skills that are strong and I need to work on this, they may agree with that. But if there's no follow-up, no practice, no reinforcement, no coaching, no ongoing feedback, then the likelihood of the skills sticking goes down dramatically.
Yes.
And it's a fact that billions of dollars are wasted in training that doesn't amount to anything. I once spoke to a fellow who called us about this Strong Performance program. He was working with a company. He had retired from one of the Fortune 500 companies as an executive, and he was brought in to this other company to do consulting work. But he said in his 30 years with this other company, every training class they ever went to, there was 0 follow-up. It was assumed that they would then apply it and use it when they got back on the job.
Right.
And so we set out to create a system that would prevent those training dollars from being wasted. And so we incorporated those elements that I just mentioned, the practice, the actual application. And another piece that's often missing, Sheree, because we're so busy, we're so pressured, you know, in the workplace, is reflection. Taking time to stop and think about, how did that last situation go? How did I handle it? You know, if I committed to, let's say, stop interrupting people. When I conducted that meeting last week and different people were starting to participate, did I monitor myself to let them finish, keep my mouth closed, or did I jump in? So if we take the time after we've applied a skill, whether we did it well or not, to stop and analyze, you know, what happened and what was the consequence of it? Why did it turn out the way it did? So we think about that, so we learn and can do it better next time. We built in that kind of a process of taking action, reflecting, and sharing that with an accountability coach, so that the learning happens over time, combined with asking for feedback on a regular basis of people to say, how am I doing with this? You know, are you seeing that I'm getting better at not interrupting, or do I still need to work on that? Because we can think we're improving, but if the people around us don't agree, then we really aren't. You know, we're kidding ourselves. So that whole process of getting the practice, getting coaching, getting support, because it's not easy. You know, whether somebody's trying to stop drinking, stop smoking, or stop doing behaviors at work that cause problems for other people, we need support as we're trying to change behaviors. And as a side note, I think too often we put pressure on ourselves as leaders to think we've got to have it all together. We've got to at least appear like we have it all together. I can't show people when I make mistakes. I can't admit when I'm wrong. When the truth is, if leaders only realized how others respect humility, they respect apologies. Because what it does is it makes that leader human, and it makes it more safe for them to make a mistake, that the individual employees to make mistakes and not feel like, you know, their head's going to be on the chopping block for having done this thing incorrectly, because this boss is always striving to perfection. I think, getting back to your question about engagement, this whole notion of creating a work environment where people feel safe, they feel appreciated and valued. That's another thing we could spend time on, is leaders not only don't know how to give constructive feedback, a lot of times they don't know how to give positive feedback in a way that really helps someone feel valued and appreciated. And when you think about it, Any friendships you have, any working relationships you've had where you have felt like people really get you, where
Mhm.
they appreciate and honor who you are and what you contribute, there's loyalty built in there when
Yes.
people sense that kind of value. And so when we're talking about the people side of business, there are so many small things that can be done to help people feel appreciated. You don't have to always be thinking about, what kind of incentives can we be putting in place to make people want to stay?
Right.
It's more, how do you make them feel when they are in the work environment?
So regardless of whether a company has 10 employees or 1,000 employees or more, it is essential for the employees to feel valued, that they're contributing, and also feel respected and they have a voice. I often recommend to leaders to employ 360 from a company perspective. Right now, with employee engagement being, employee satisfaction being the buzzword, a lot of companies do have the assessments and do the company-wide assessments. But if they combine the company-wide assessments with 360s for leaders, for individuals, you can really bring back all the findings together and make a meaningful impact to the company. Oftentimes these things are done, but they're not, we don't take action. Just the training that you mentioned, training is an introduction of an idea. And thousands of dollars are spent on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, companies bringing training or having someone in the company internal doing trainings, and it doesn't pay off. Things don't change because behaviors take time to change. And you usually forget most everything you learned during the training session in a matter of a week or two, unless it is kept fresh. It is very worthwhile to conduct the company-wide 360s, which your tool is customizable. So not only can be done for individuals, but easily can be customized from a general perspective, or if there is something specific going on that the organization needs to know more and develop a strategy to address it.
Yeah, you can really set up anyone or anything to be
Mhm.
the subject of the feedback. So, for example, another area that is a great application is setting up the team to
Mhm.
receive feedback. And you can do this in two different ways. One, if you think about team building, where you want everybody on the team on the same page and going in the same direction, you can set up the name of the team as the subject, and everybody on the team rates the team. How well do we share resources? How well do we communicate what's going on with our projects? So there are a number of questions you could ask that would help the team find out, where do we as a team need to improve
Mhm.
in the way we interact with each other, in the way we set up our processes and systems to get things done. So there's that kind of a team assessment. And another one is where you set up the team to get feedback from its internal customers. So
Right.
if you had a department like HR that everybody is impacted by, and you can set up the responders, instead of like a 360 has manager, peer, direct report, you could set up the different departments as the respondent types,
Right.
so that human resources, or let's say accounting, where everybody's impacted by payroll, any department whose internal customers are widespread, you could give input to let them know what is it they're doing well, and what is it people are saying, gosh, we'd like to see this improved or that improved. So
Right.
they get input in a time efficient way about how they could serve better those internal customers. You can also, of course, do a survey with the company as the subject, where you get input from your external customers.
Yes. Yes. We all know that in corporate life, most of the time the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and that ignorance pretty much creates chaos, and processes don't align. So a lot of times when I work with organizations, helping them with alignment, it is not just alignment in strategy, it's alignment in processes between the different departments. Also, one thing that you mentioned, teams, there are more organizations now that the work doesn't get done by individuals, but they're small teams. It's a lot of work gets
Right.
done in today's business by teams. And HR.com actually conducted a study addressing this fact and how teams can be effective. And that feedback goes to the heart of how can we make our team more successful, as well as creating more personal gratification for team members as being part of that team and contributing to the work.
Well, that's an excellent point, and it reminds me, you can also ask open-ended questions such as, what could be done to help our team be more effective or produce better results? And you'll get some amazing ideas that you wouldn't have gotten if you didn't just ask. The other example I wanted to just share real quick, because this will bring it to real life for people. There was a fellow, one of the consultants who was using our software, was working with a hotel owner who wanted to find out what was going on in his hotel, because he was having a lot of absenteeism. He was just picking up, there was very low morale, and he wasn't sure why. So he had her come in and do this survey of everybody. And because he thought having an external person do it, they'd feel safer being honest, which they were. And he was in for a very rude awakening, because what he found out was he was the source of a lot of the problems.
Right.
And so even though it wasn't a 360 done on him specifically, it turned out to be and point to the fact that he was where a lot of these issues started, because he tended to be a micromanager. He was in everybody's business, not letting them really get their work done the way they thought they could, questioning things. And one of his core values was treating people with respect. So it really hit him hard that people did not feel respected.
Yes.
And so with the help of this consultant who, one of the greatest things, it requires courage to ask for feedback like this, and then to actually look at it and say, oh my goodness, I got some changes I need to make here. And you take ownership for it. And he did. And he committed to making improvements, and he checked in with people along the way. And this consultant was working with him remotely quite a bit. And so she came back to the hotel 6 months later. She had been doing extensive coaching with him, and he had been doing a lot of work personally. And she had people that were employees coming up to her and hugging her and saying, I love coming to work now, thank you.
Oh,
because she had helped point him in the right direction. He had done the work. And the whole atmosphere there had changed, because he not only committed, he was public about it. He acknowledged to everybody, I apologize. I have not been operating the way I wanted to. And he made these commitments to change, and he actually changed person by person, department by department, going in and meeting with them to find out what needed to be done differently. And what was the side effect of that is his home life improved.
Yes.
Because he was becoming different. He was becoming more aligned with the person he wanted to be and thought of himself as being, compared to the reality that other people were experiencing.
Right.
So this kind of feedback is just critical at the individual and the organizational level, if we are willing to face the truth about where we're not, operating up to standard, and be willing to make changes.
And this is so important for smaller organizations as they grow. In their journey, they hit different stages, and each stage requires a different leadership modality and leadership characteristics. And it is not expected of any of us to know all of that, because most of us are a technician of some sort in a specific field when we go into business, right? I wanted to start a business, so I start. Now, do I know everything about being a leader of an organization that is employing 50 to 100 or more employees, or even 10 employees for that matter? No, because that wasn't part of my expertise. So I often encourage the leaders, the CEOs, presidents, the executive vice presidents, and as such, that it is okay to learn, because not everything you're doing is within your strength. And you mentioned that earlier, leveraging each other's experience, but at the same time expanding our own when it comes to areas that is not our expertise. So that's a point well made.
And you know, something else I was just thinking of that I think will be helpful for your listeners is when you get feedback, it's important to have the attitude of this is information. This is helpful information. It's not a judgment.
That's
You know,
right.
we tend to be critical of ourselves and we expect ourselves to be a certain way. And when we fall short, we can fall into this self-criticism and, you know, judging ourselves. And the reality is that's not the most useful way to look at this feedback. Think of it as suggestions where people are trying to help you become more successful. And
Right.
so if you make these changes, life will be better for everyone. And I think that's really the spirit of, you know, looking at feedback as a gift, which
Yes.
people can go, what? But it's true. If you can learn to say thank you when people give you feedback, then you're inviting them to do it again. They
Right.
don't feel like, uh-oh, I paid too high a price for saying that. I won't speak up again. And then the leader is robbed of information that's important for making good decisions, for the direction. It's just so critical to keep those lines of communication open.
Yes, and you mentioned something. You said with the example you were offering that for the leader of this hotel, his home life got improved. And that is so funny. I have a personal experience with that. I was helping an organization with different risks that they were facing and addressing some issues, meanwhile, coaching the executive team. And the president or the organization, I asked about 250 employees. I asked the president after several months, do you see any changes? Do you feel, is this impactful? The time we spend together, the processes we're putting in place, and the changes that you are taking on as an individual, as a leader, do you see any change? And he sat back and he said, yes. And I said, well, what is it? He said, my wife loves me again. So even though I'm not a marriage counselor, nor did we ever address personal issues, but personal development addresses the self in any individual and
Yeah,
leads you through life in any relationship.
exactly. We're whole people. And
Yeah,
so what happens in one area affects the other and vice versa.
absolutely.
So that's a great story.
Well, Meredith, you and I can go on for hours and we still have more things to say, but I really appreciate your time and you sharing your journey, tools that you offer the business community, and your insight. Anything else that you like to add that I haven't asked?
Just for folks that do tend to focus on the technical side, you know, the operational side of the business, the people side is what makes it all run.
Yes.
And so asking how much attention am I giving to not just developing, but paying attention to, interacting with the different people on my team so they feel valued, appreciated, and even elevated. Because I think that that's really an important value to have, is that when I interact with people as a leader, am I leaving them better off after our interaction than they were before we interacted? And that presents kind of a higher bar to reach, right? You
Yeah.
don't want to just, you don't want to just avoid hurting people or saying things that are not going to be helpful, but you want to actually consciously think about, what could I say that could enrich this person or this situation, so they go away standing a little taller, feeling better because of my interaction with them. That's an interesting challenge.
Well said. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time, and I look forward to have other conversations in the future about.
Thank you, Sheree. It was really great to be with you.
Thank you.